Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you suspect something. What you suspect you can't explain, but you feel it. That there's something odd about the Matrix movies. You don't know what it is, but it's there, bothering you, like a pebble in your shoe. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you want to know the secret behind the Matrix? The Matrix is an adaptation of a book so very different from the reality of the film that even its similarity seems impossible. Unfortunately, no one can be told that it's just an adaptation. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You stop listening, you don't know any more than you did before. Continue listening, and I show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Today on Book vs. Movie, I'm covering The Matrix, the iconic movie from 1999. I stumbled over the movie's likely heritage while preparing a different book versus movie for the great Susan Cooper work The Dark is Rising, published in 1973. Originally, I was going to compare the book to the stinkingly awful film adaptation of the book from 2007, using it as an opportunity to showcase a bad movie made from a great book. But sometimes you catch a lucky break. I realized while working through the synopsis of the story that the book had some bits that were kind of Matrix-y. And once the idea formed, I went back and took a good hard look at the plot and realized that it had a lot of pieces that were Matrix-y. In fact, most of it was Matrix-y. I came to the conclusion that The Matrix is actually a fairly faithful adaptation of the book The Dark is Rising. Ironically, it is a closer adaptation of the book than the actual movie adaptation that I was originally comparing it to. To show how this works, I need to first go through the book synopsis, and then the plot of the Matrix movie, and then finally how I think the book was adapted. Because believe me, nobody could have been more surprised than I was to see the similarities. The Dark is Rising is a fantasy book about an 11-year-old coming into ancient powers on his birthday. It seemed like the absolute last place anyone would even look for the origins of the Matrix. But here we go. Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising is the second in a series of 5 books in the Dark is Rising series, which began with Over Sea Under Stone. This second book picks up with a new protagonist than those of the first book, and it can be read independently from the rest with no problem. The book begins with the young Will Stanton on the eve of his 11th birthday. A snowstorm is gathering, and Will is having a strange day. His pets treat him like a stranger, and electrical devices give way to static when he walks by. On an errand to get hay from his neighbor's farm, Will and his brother see a vagrant on the road who seems to be watching them. At the farm, Will's neighbor gives Will a strange iron circle as an early birthday present. It's quartered with a cross, and he tells him to keep it with him on his belt. On their way home, they see the vagrant again being attacked by swooping crows. Back at home, Will feels odd, an ominous fear hitting him at strange times. He wakes in the middle of the night when snow has burst through his window. And then in the morning, he wakes and finds himself in another time, long in the past. He goes to his neighbor's farm again and finds instead a blacksmith showing a giant black horse of a rider clad in black. The rider tries to get Will to go with him, but Will resists, and the rider rides off. The smith refers to Will as newly woken, but doesn't explain. A perfectly white horse shows up to the smith to be shod, and Will leaves the smith to shoe the horse. Will walks up a lonely road and meets the walker again, the vagrant he had seen the day before, and is trying to ask for more information when he is attacked by the black rider. The white horse then shows up just in time to save Will, and he rides the horse back to the lane. Will gets off the horse and finds himself in front of a pair of doors standing alone at the top of a hill. He goes through the doors and finds himself in an old great castle room with a beautiful old lady and a white-haired, wiry old man who introduces himself as Merriman Lion. They tell Will that he has now awakened to his destiny as the last of the Old Ones, ancient, powerful, magical beings tasked with keeping the dark at bay. They are the defenders of the light, and Will is more than just the 11-year-old boy he thought he was. He is also a powerful being in his own right, even if he has only just that day been awakened to his power. They tell him that his first great task is to gather the 6 signs of the light, ancient symbols that will join together to defeat the dark. They tell him that he already has the first, the iron circle that was given to him earlier by his neighbor. They are interrupted by the forces of the dark, who are assaulting their fortress from the outside. They mimic the voice of Will's mother crying out in pain, and Will can't help but go to the sound of her voice, even with Merriman telling Will that it is not truly his mother. Before he can be taken by the dark, their assault is pushed back by the lady, who is described as wondrous and impossibly ancient and powerful. Merriman takes Will back to his own time and tells him to get the second sign from the walker, and then Merriman disappears. Will attempts to go back to his normal life, buying Christmas presents for his family before finding the walker on the way back to his house one day. He demands that the walker give him the second sign, which the walker has been tasked with guarding for hundreds of years. The walker is reluctant, but Will shows him the first sign and proves his powers, and the walker gives up the sign, a bronze circle quartered through the center, just like the first. Will takes it, and immediately the two are stopped by Maggie Barnes, the neighbor's milkmaid, who it turns out was one of the minions of the dark. Will and the walker are held motionless before Merriman shows up and banishes her off the road, which he explains to Will is one of the old ways of power. Will and his now two signs of power are left free to go home, and the walker disappears, free of his burden. Christmas Eve rolls around, and Will and his siblings all go caroling. At the house of their wealthy neighbor, Miss Graythorne, they're all invited in, and Will is surprised to see Merriman again, acting as butler for the elderly Miss Graythorne. In the midst of a carol, time stops, and Will and Merriman walk into the past, to a Christmas party 100 years earlier, with a very much younger Miss Graythorne. Will is introduced to a handful of other old ones, and Miss Graythorne tells him that the third sign, the sign of wood, is to be remade that evening, as the sign of wood must renew itself every 100 years. The old ones gather and cast the old sign of wood into the fire, where it becomes the new sign of wood. Miss Graythorne takes it out of the fire and brushes off the ash, to show that it is now fresh wood. Will is shown where to find the sign when he goes back to his own time, and it is hidden again. The rest of the old ones go back to the party, but Will is taken to finally receive training from the Book of Gramarye. The book has been protected by a trap that uses Merriman's human servant Hawkins as a failsafe. Unless Merriman is touching Hawkins when he retrieves the book from its hiding place, the book will be destroyed. The fact of this leaves the man Hawkins none too pleased, but the book is retrieved and given to Will to teach him everything he needs to know about how to be an old one. The book is more than just a book. Will experiences all the wisdom as if he was there in the lesson. He finally learns the spells he needs to know, as well as how to change himself into a hawk, the ways of fish, and the speech of trees. When Will is finally armed with the training on how to be an old one, Merriman destroys the Book of Gramarye, as well as the last of their kind. Fully upgraded, Will goes out into the party again with Merriman, and watches as Hawkins gets recruited to the dark side by Maggie Barnes, the evil milkmaid witch who had earlier attacked Will on the snowy path. Hawkins gives in rather easily after realizing how totally he had been used by the light. Will then finds himself back in the present day amongst his siblings, singing carols again. When they finish, Will goes off to find the hidden sign of wood in its concealed niche above the old fireplace. Then he and his siblings go back home for Christmas Eve. Christmas morning, Will opens a present from his brother, who had been stationed in Jamaica with the Navy. The gift is a large carnival head in the shape of an antlered stag, with a mostly human face, and it holds the imprint of the sign of the crossed circle on its forehead. A letter with the present says that somebody had given the head to his brother, with explicit instructions that it was to be sent to Will for Christmas. Their Christmas morning is interrupted by a knock on the door. The visitor is invited in, and Will is shocked to find that it is the Dark Rider, introduced as Mr. Middethin, an associate of Will's father, dropping off a present Will's father had made for Will's mother. Furious, Will stops time and considers blasting the rider with his ultimate weapon, before the rider stops him by pointing out that the blast would kill Will's entire family. The rider tells Will that Will is not strong enough to do anything to him, but that the dark is rising and can't be stopped. Then he promptly returns everyone to normal time, says his farewells, and leaves. Will and several of his siblings go to church for Christmas morning service, and at the end of the service, when everyone is leaving, the dark again makes an assault on the church. Will is helped by some of the old ones, including his neighbor, Farmer Dawson, and they make a circle against an attack that is now hundreds of ravens attacking the church. Will realizes he has to face them alone, that he alone has the signs, which have the power to stop them. He breaks free of their circle and holds his belt up with the 3 signs on it, and their power immediately stops the attack. The birds disappear as if they were never there. The power of the 3 signs also wakes and calls to the 4th sign, which was in a gap of the old stone church wall. The 4th sign shines out with a beam of light, and Will goes to get it, finding it is a quartered circle like the rest, this time made of flint. It is the sign of stone and joins the others on Will's belt. In the back of the church on the way out, they find the half-frozen body of the walker, who they take back to Will's house to recover while they get the doctor. A few days later, a massive snowstorm sent by the dark buries the small town Will lives in, and when the electricity fails, Miss Graythorn invites all the villagers to her manor house to share food and heat while the storm is at its worst. Will ends up there with a few of his brothers and his dad, as well as the walker, who they had been nursing after he had been found collapsed. The storm rises to its peak, and deadly cold descends on the house. Will and the other old ones there fade back into the interior of the ancient hall, where the old lady joins them in the new assault of the dark. The walker phases back to the great hall along with the old ones, and it is revealed that he is Hawkins, the former servant of Merriman, who has since turned to the dark. They try to convince Hawkins that he can still turn back to the light, but he tells them the dark were better masters. Hawkins formally invites the dark into the hall. Will phases to the present, where snow has fallen down the chimney and put out the fire, and the cold is descending on them. There in the present, Hawkins begins raving and tries to attack Will. The doctor sedates Hawkins, and as soon as Hawkins is unconscious, the dark is pushed back, having lost their anchor to the interior of the hall. Before they could all disappear, the old ones grab the cold flames of the dark and force them into the forms of candles. They fill a candle holder with these dark candles, and the now filled holder blazes forth with a central flame that blooms into a fire flower, the center of which is the 5th sign, the sign of fire. Will takes this sign, which is made in multicolored gold, and adds it to the rest. They have no time to celebrate because news arrives that Will's mother has fallen down the stairs and broken her leg. Will and his family members go home only to find that their sister Mary has left to find them, but has gone missing in what is now a torrential downpour. Will goes back out and ends up facing off against the Black Rider at the top of a large hill. The Black Rider shows that he has Will's sister Mary enchanted as his prisoner and demands that Will hand over the signs in exchange for his sister. Will refuses, and the dark attempts to send Mary off to drown in the now flooding river, only to have her saved at the last second by Merriman sweeping in on the white horse. A tremendous bolt of lightning breaks the hill Will is standing on, and the dirt falls off what turns out to be a huge ship, which had been buried with a king in his burial mound. The dead king is grasping the last sign, the sign of water, in his hand, and Will takes the final sign, breaking the power of the dark over his sister. The river rises up and bears the king's ship off for its final voyage. The dark prepares for a last assault, but the Great Hunt has been called. Will gives the carnival mask to Hearn, the leader of the Great Hunt, and it is not a mask any longer, but his true form, his great antlered head. The Great Hunt rides with Hearn, followed by the hounds of the hunt, and the Dark Rider is now their quarry, who they will hunt till the ends of the earth. Will and Merriman take the 6 signs to be joined together by the smith who Will met at the very beginning. There the signs are joined together, and in their joining they become more powerful than they had been before, a tool for the final battle that is still yet to come. The book ends with Will going home, happy in a new day, with the sun rising brightly. Susan Cooper is a superb writer. She's a master of prose, of the sheer art of constructing a sentence. The Dark is Rising is especially strong. The dreamlike sense of non-reality makes the story more of an experience than just a book. You find yourself pulled into her stories. There's a reason so many other writers use her work as template and instruction manual. She also masterfully constructs the conflict of good and evil. Now over to The Matrix. I was very happy to rewatch The Matrix again. There's never a bad time to watch The Matrix, and I saw it this time on Blu-ray with surround sound. Highly recommended. The Matrix begins with a mysterious woman being chased by police. Some men in black show up and tell police that any agents who had been sent after her are likely dead. The mysterious woman makes a daring escape, chased now by agents themselves. She runs to a telephone booth where she picks up the phone and disappears, before the telephone booth is obliterated by a truck. We then meet Neo asleep on his desk when his computer blanks taken over and Trinity contacts Neo to arrange for him to meet a man called Morpheus, who will explain the Matrix to him. The next day at work, Neo, aka Thomas Anderson, is about to be picked up by the nameless agents for his hacking when a mysterious cell phone arrives and the man on the phone tries to direct him out of the path of the agents. But Neo balks at walking on a ledge outside the building and ends up taken in by them for questioning. In the room, the interrogation turns nightmarish as his mouth seals up and the agents pin him down and inject a squirming electronic device into his stomach. Neo wakes up in his apartment thinking the whole thing had been a dream. He meets the mysterious Trinity and leaves with her to go meet Morpheus. On the way, they remove the bug from Neo's stomach and drop it out onto the road. Neo meets Morpheus, who explains that they all live inside a simulated reality called the Matrix, where they're all kept as prisoners and power cells by the machine rulers of the planet. Neo is given a choice between two pills: the blue pill, which will allow him to go back to his normal life, or the red pill to continue further. Neo takes the red pill and wakes up in his pod in the real world. He is picked up by Morpheus and his crew in their hover ship, the Nebuchadnezzar, where his body is nursed into his new life. This new life proves to be dark and gritty, with the machines always trying to find and destroy the remaining free humans. Morpheus and his crew have been going back into the Matrix to attempt to free those still there, but are pursued always by the agents, who are trying to kill the rebels. They hold the great hope that Neo is the one who has been prophesied to have the power to change the Matrix itself. Neo is trained how to fight via downloaded knowledge in a local version of the Matrix, and his capabilities are so strong that the crew begin to hope he truly is the one. Neo has a sparring match with Morpheus, who tries to teach Neo that the limits of the program are artificial, and that if you're aware of them, you can work around them. To demonstrate, Morpheus loads the jump program, where he proceeds to make a tremendous leap from the top of one high-rise to another a great distance away. Neo tries to follow suit, but loses faith midway and plummets to the ground. The crew despair that this might mean Neo is not the one. Meanwhile, Cypher, a disgruntled crew member, meets with Agent Smith and agrees to give up the rest of his crew in exchange for being plugged back in and having his memory erased. Morpheus and his crew take Neo back into the Matrix in order to meet the Oracle, an ancient program and part of the Matrix itself who had prophesied the coming of the One. Neo visits her, where she is a grandmotherly type, baking cookies and taking care of several small children with the power to bend the rules of the Matrix. The Oracle reassures Neo that he isn't actually the One, much to his relief, but she does warn him that he will soon have to choose between Morpheus's life and his own. Alerted by Cypher, the agents set up an ambush back at the hotel that serves as their jump point. When Morpheus and the rest return, one of them has been killed at the jump station, and they all attempt to escape by running out via a hole in the wall. Cypher finds a phone and escapes, only to begin unplugging people in the real world, killing them while the rest can only watch inside the Matrix. He's about to unplug Neo, saying that if Neo were actually the One, he couldn't be unplugged, but one of the crew members revives enough to attack Cypher before he can finish it. Morpheus has started fighting Agent Smith single-handedly to allow the others to escape. Trinity and Neo make it out, but Morpheus is captured by the agents and taken prisoner for his knowledge of the mainframe codes of the last human city, Zion. In the real world, they're about to unplug Morpheus before he can give away the codes, but Neo stops them, saying he will go in to save Morpheus, that it doesn't matter if Neo sacrifices himself, as he isn't the One. Trinity demands to go with him, and they proceed together to invade the building where Morpheus is being held prisoner. In the real world, Sentinel robots are sent to find the ship they're contained on. Meanwhile, back in the Matrix, Neo and Trinity shoot a lot of bullets and go up to the roof of the building that holds Morpheus, where a helicopter is waiting. An agent takes over the body of the helicopter pilot and tries to shoot down Neo, but Neo manages to dodge all the bullets. Trinity kills the agent while he's distracted by Neo. Trinity takes over the helicopter and they fly down to shoot out the agents in the room where Morpheus is being held. Morpheus escapes out to the helicopter and they all fly away. The agents do manage to hit the helicopter and it crashes into the side of a building, but Neo, Trinity, and Morpheus escape. They find a phone and Morpheus leaves, followed by Trinity. Neo, however, is confronted by Agent Smith, who shoots the phone, blocking Neo's way out. Neo fights Agent Smith and escapes again. He's directed back to the hotel to exit and gets there only to find agents waiting who shoot him point blank. Sentinels are tearing into the ship, but Neo rises again in the Matrix, alive after Trinity admits that she loved him and that he can't be dead because the Oracle told her she would be in love with the One. Neo rises with new powers and can now see the code of the Matrix. When the agents shoot at him again, he simply stops the bullets. Agent Smith tries to fight Neo, but Neo jumps into the agent and destroys his code. Neo leaves by the phone and is back just in time before they have to use the EMP to stop the Sentinels who have come into the ship. The movie ends with Neo placing a call to the agents from a payphone, telling them that he's going to show the rest of humanity a world where anything is possible. Then he proceeds to fly off. The Matrix is one of my favorite movies. Heck, it's one of everybody's favorite movies from my generation. The Halloween after the movie came out, most of my friends were sporting black trench coats, hefty black boots, and dark sunglasses. Just hearing the sound of the Matrix movies again brings a breathless thrill. Listing the events of the plot in a synopsis does nothing to explain the awesome power of this movie. The feeling after seeing it the first time that maybe the world was all an illusion and could crack open in front of you at any second. It's one of a very small number of movies that changed how we look at the world. But now, there's also something a little bittersweet about it. Because of the effect of time and the Matrix sequels have dimmed my memory of the films a bit. The sense of the original greatness is still there, but it's like the hint of a fragrance from the past. Maybe reality just got too dark, and that bright, starlit sense of possibility from the 90s had to yield to the dark pragmatism of real life. Nonetheless, I'm very happy to be able to talk about the Matrix movies and to potentially provide a bit of context about their creation, even now, so many years later. So, now that I've described the full plot synopsis of both the movie The Matrix and the book The Dark is Rising, let me try to show how I think the book was used as the basis for the plot of The Matrix. Superficially, they seem like two really different stories. For me, the first point of intersection was the Book of Gramarye. Every time I read about Will absorbing knowledge from the book, I mentally inserted that he was downloading it. After thinking this for the second or third time, I actually stopped and thought. I ran through the rest of the story. Random boy finds he has powers. These powers are explained by a wise older magician type who then pulls the boy into a fellowship. The boy is hunted by a dark rider and then betrayed by an old trusted friend of the magician. The boy has to rescue a kidnapped friend, and then a final confrontation with a dark rider. I thought, that is the plot of The Matrix. Morpheus takes on the role of the wise wizard Merriman. The Dark Rider would then be Agent Smith, and Cypher would be Hawkins. The Oracle would be the Lady from the Great Hall. It all fits so neatly, so cleanly, that I think the book had to be the foundation for the films. Once you strip away the cyberpunk sci-fi trimming, the plot follows the book pretty much point for point. So now, let me run through the plot points of The Matrix that I think were adapted straight from The Dark is Rising in a bit more detail so you can see the flavor of this thing. Starting with The Awakening. When Will wakes on the morning of his 11th birthday, he walks into a world out of the past and meets the Dark Rider, who chases him down and attempts to capture him before Will is saved by the White Horse. The book starts with a scene that feels like a dream, where Will meets the bad guy. In its place in The Matrix, we have the scene that Neo thinks was a nightmare, where the agents tracked him down at work and took him in for questioning. And he's later saved by Trinity in the car that takes him to go see Morpheus. Your part explained. Next, Will goes through a pair of doors and meets Merriman in a great room where there are two large chairs in front of the fireplace. Merriman and the lady explain Will's new awakened fate as an old one. In The Matrix, Neo meets Morpheus, who explains the mystery of their world in a room with two large chairs in front of the fire. Meeting the others. Will steps back in time where he meets a gathering of other old ones. Neo instead steps forward in time, meeting a similar gathering of like-minded souls on the ship. Downloading important knowledge. While in the past, Will receives and absorbs the knowledge held in the Book of Gramarye. It is described not just as a book that is read, but as one where it is experienced, where every sentence holds a lesson that is felt. Just like that is Neo's training, where the lessons are simply downloaded into Neo, and afterwards he is fully trained. The first test. In the book, the dark attacks the Great Room, and Will fails to listen to the old ones who tell him his mother's voice is just a ruse. In the movie, Neo fails his first test as the One when he tries and fails to jump over the gap. Meanwhile, treachery from a friend. At the Christmas party with the old ones, Will sees Hawkins won over to the dark side. In The Matrix, Cypher is seen having dinner with Agent Smith, agreeing to hand over Morpheus in exchange for being plugged back in. Like Hawkins, Cypher is described as being with the rebellion a long time. 9 years of bad food and always being hunted. Stopping time. One of the powers of both Will and the Dark Rider is the ability to freeze other people in time, so that they can talk to each other outside of the awareness of others. Compare this to how agents and eventually Neo have bullet time, where they can move faster than everything else around them, which in practice is pretty much the same as stopping time. The attack aided by the traitor. Will Merriman and several of the old ones defend the Great Hall from the Dark attacking, both in present day with the snowstorm and in the Great Hall with Hawkins inviting them in. Hawkins simultaneously tries to attack Will in the present day before being sedated by the doctor. Parallel to this is the attack both inside the Matrix where Cypher told the agents when they arrived, and Cypher also attacking them on the ship by unplugging them. Like with Hawkins, they're only saved when someone takes out Cypher on the ship. The critical hostage. The Dark Rider captures Will's sister Mary and holds her ransom for the signs of power, but Will refuses. In place of that, Morpheus is taken prisoner for the information he holds, and Neo has to go free him, setting up the final battle of the film. More generally, if you look at the form of the Matrix, Neo and his friends jump around between 2 different times, switching between the dystopian future of the real world and the world of 1999 from the Matrix. This parallels the way Will and Merriman go back to the Great Hall in the past, which is assaulted from outside by the mostly unseen forces of the dark. The old ones are mirrored by Morpheus's group of rebels, who possess special skills in the world of the Matrix. The big difference between the two is that the Matrix makes the issue of Neo's existence as the One the big question of the film, the thing that is left in doubt throughout the whole movie, before having Neo come into his full powers at the end. This, I think, was a device pulled from a different book, from the book Dune by Frank Herbert. The phrase, "Is he the one?" is a direct quote from Dune.
Is he the one?
He is the one.
They're talking about Paul potentially being the Kwisatz Haderach. I think all concept of the one comes from Dune originally. The idea of a prophesied one, and all the prophecies about him, and possibly Trinity as the love interest for the One. Trinity doesn't really have a corresponding role in The Dark is Rising, except possibly Bran from the later books. But the role of a love interest was not important or relevant to an 11-year-old Will. I do wonder if Chani was pulled over to the Matrix to be Trinity. I have no doubts anymore that the Matrix was based lovingly and accurately on the book The Dark is Rising. Contributing to this certainty is the fact that I have read the rest of the books in the Dark is Rising series, and guess what? The Matrix sequels were also loosely adapted from the other books in the Dark is Rising series. This means that we can finally get some context about where the rest of the story came from. That's right, if you've ever wondered why the Merovingian was there, or the Keymaster, I can now explain such mysteries. Why did Neo end up in a white room full of monitors? I can explain this too. Reading the Dark is Rising books is like being handed a Matrix primer, given the original text that it was adapted from. It is a marvelous, gargantuan find, giving the kind of clarity I never thought I'd get about the largely incomprehensible sequels. I will cover both of the sequels in episodes of their own to give each the space they're due. So for book versus movie, man, this one is hard. How do you choose which is the best? The Dark is Rising is the progenitor of so much else, it's hard to really understand the scope of the book's influence. On the other hand, The Matrix is one of the best movies in the history of film. Beautiful, atmospheric, groundbreaking. I'm comparing two great things and trying to say which is greater. I think, in the long run, however, the book wins. So many people took the concepts in the book and expanded on them that it's hard not to see it as a kind of stellar nursery, a source of the Promethean fire that benefited so many other writers that even if Prometheus, Susan Cooper, in this case, was never credited. The book should still receive the credit for the greatness that it's due. Side notes. The Matrix isn't the only series directly and obviously inspired by The Dark is Rising. More obvious than The Matrix, which was actually kind of subtle, is the book series The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. The Wheel of Time is an almost straight take on The Dark is Rising series. Robert Jordan used a whole lot of other influences in his massive series, but the first book especially is nearly fan service for The Dark is Rising. Tom Merrilin is pretty obviously a copy of Merriman Lion, white hair, angular features and all. I hope to cover The Wheel of Time in the future, where I can go into the similarities in more detail. But The Wheel of Time uses huge parts from The Dark is Rising as obvious inspiration. I had to stop myself from calling the milkmaid, Maggie Barnes, a dark friend, though she clearly is the prototype of the dark friend, and the walker turns into Padden Fane the peddler, who carries a cursed knife. I'm also not convinced that Star Wars doesn't owe its framing of the dark side to Susan Cooper. Also, Harry Potter's coming into his wizard powers on his 11th birthday is a straight tribute to Cooper. In terms of inspirations Cooper herself used for the works, the two big ones were The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien and The Sword and the Stone by T.H. White. The Lord of the Rings references are pretty clear. The Walker is like a character study on Smeagol and Gollum. The wearing influence of the sign is pretty close to the One Ring, and the Dark Rider is pretty close to the Nazgul. The Sword and the Stone references are probably not as obvious, as the book has been mostly out of print since the 40s. I got a copy when I was doing a book versus movie for the Disney version of The Sword and the Stone, so I'm probably one of a very small number of people who got the reference. But everything Will learns in the Book of Gramarye is a lesson that Merlin gave Arthur from the original Sword and the Stone, from being a bird to a fish to learning the language of trees. In some sense, the Book of Gramarye is the Sword and the Stone. And if you're interested, you yourself can get a copy, either of the reprint from 1996 or one of the original copies. While they're not exactly common, they're not hidden by magical enchantments, just the ordinary dust of forgetfulness. About the movie The Seeker, even fans of the book The Dark is Rising probably don't know that they made a movie adaptation. I had no idea this film existed before finding it on a shelf of used DVDs. From what I can tell, this film was released and then promptly allowed to sink into total oblivion almost immediately. I don't recall even a hint of publicity from when it came out. And for whatever reason, in the US they released it under the title The Seeker, abandoning any chance of someone recognizing that it was an adaptation for The Dark is Rising, and linking it instead vaguely to a Harry Potter reference. Having read up about the film before watching it, I didn't have high hopes going in, and boy did it manage to miss even those. I mean, it is not a good movie. I had to stop halfway through and go do something else because I just couldn't watch the whole thing in one go. The movie was adapted from a great book, but it turns out you can start with every advantage and still fail. I think quite a lot of the blame falls on the screenwriter, John Hodge. John Hodge is probably best known as the Academy Award-winning screenwriter for Trainspotting, having adapted a book that everyone said was unadaptable and crafting it into a wry, funny, sad masterpiece of cinema. But in The Seeker, it's like he decided to take everything good from the book and throw it away. In place of the signs representing the elements, instead Will finds the 6 in the following locations. 1. A mall kiosk. 2. A snake-filled underground crypt. 3. A Scottish battle, where Will traded it from a warrior for a digital watch. 4. A cockfight in a tavern. 5. A massive flood. And the 6th is Will realizing that he himself is the last sign. Other injustices include the fact that Will and his whole family are Americans. Will is 14, the Dark Rider rides a white horse, and Will's father is a physicist who wrote his thesis on the nature of good and evil. Will has angst and blows up some cars and a couple of buildings in what Merriman calls, quote, expressing himself. And maybe worst of all is Will's brother, who is supposed to have died, but in this one stays alive and was kept prisoner by the dark the whole time only to be saved by Will at the end of the movie. Hodge clearly knew that The Matrix was based on the book and has a few callouts to The Matrix. From Will getting pulled aside by freaky mall security to him stopping the dark by hand at the end of the movie. But in this stinker of a movie, it just feels jealous. Like he couldn't figure out what to make of this book and covered for it by pointing out other better films. Susan Cooper was interviewed before the release of the film and gave one of my favorite quotes of all time about adaptation. She said, "You do have to do violence to a book in order to make it into a screenplay. The two mediums are very different, but the alterations are so enormous in this case. It's just different." It's possible that The Dark is Rising is fated to be one of those books that provides pure inspiration for others while never getting its own great movie adaptation. Susan Cooper is the godmother of modern fantasy, having directly inspired Harry Potter, The Matrix, and The Wheel of Time, though few now know who she is. But maybe someday someone will take a shot at making a better adaptation of her books. I hope so. They could be spectacular. This is Rose with Rose-Colored Movies. Thanks for listening.
According to this, Dad, maybe darkness isn't just dark, but like a thing.